Welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now let's start with the first story. It's called Bank Error. This happened almost 40 years ago, up in Scotland, UK. I've always lived somewhat on autopilot, thinking about things in my own little world and not paying enough attention to the circumstances around me. My friends and I were having a card night, and because we didn't have gambling chips, I was to go to the bank to get coins for us all to use. So with my usual lack of planning, I end up at the bank 5 minutes before closing time on a Friday afternoon. The bank teller is not pleased to see a scruffy teenage lad in ripped jeans, leather biker's jacket and denim waistcoat in her smart bank, and even less pleased when I ask for £200 of small change, just before she can go home for the weekend. Off she goes to get the coins, muttering under her breath about my request. Several minutes later, she returned with about 6 bags of coins and pushed them across the counter to me. Her body language clearly said, "Here's your money, now get lost." So I did. I picked up the coins and walked out. It was only outside the bank that my dozy self realized that I hadn't given her my account details yet, so I hadn't paid for the coins. I had a choice. Did I return to the bank, apologize and pay? Or should I slip down a nearby alley and keep the money? To my teenage self, it was a fortune, and the teller clearly disliked me, so I'm ashamed to say I kept the cash. The next story is called Making It Louder. In my 20s, I spent my weekends as a soundboard operator for a local community theater. After all the mics were set up, it was pretty simple, and I really enjoyed it. One actor made a request to be able to hear herself on stage. Now, before I continue, I need to explain how the soundboard works. Basically, there are 2 sets of volume controls. One is the fader. You know this as those sliders, which controls how loud the channel is going to be to the audience. Above those are a bunch of knobs, which will direct the sound to other speakers. We use these to direct sound to the orchestra, so the conductor knows where we are in the show, the dressing room, so the actors know, and to some speakers pointed on stage, called monitors, which allow the actors to hear the orchestra. These fall into one of 2 groups, pre-fade and post-fade. Pre-fade means that the volume would stay the same level, no matter what the fader was set to, and post-fade is just the opposite. We would pipe the orchestra into the pre-fade, since there are not a lot of mics that can pick up ambient noise. Band members talking, for example. The monitors on the stage were plugged into the pre-fade channel. Once we set those levels, we never had to touch them, which made it easier to focus on what was happening on stage. Since this actor wanted to hear herself while on stage, it meant that I had to add her to that pre-fade channel. This meant that when she got on or off stage, I not only did have to slide the fader down, but also turn the knob to avoid picking up what was happening in the dressing room. This was no problem, as I had time to make all the adjustments. However, she kept complaining that she couldn't hear herself, so I would make small adjustments, trying to find the right balance. But each time she got off stage, she would say that it was not loud enough. One show I had the volume up so loud that it made her sound very muted in the house, since I had to turn her down in the house. And yet she still complained it was not loud enough. It was so loud that I went backstage, but didn't even make it that far. It was so loud I heard her through 4 rooms with cement walls. That's when I came up with a plan. The next day I set the monitor level at a reasonable volume, around 10 o'clock on the dial. She complained again that it was not loud enough, so instead of turning her up, I turned the dial down to 8 o'clock. After she got off stage, I asked her if that was better. She didn't say it was worse, but she wanted it louder. I turned it back to 10 o'clock, the level I wanted her at. After she got off stage that time, she exclaimed that it was just perfect and to keep it there. After that, I kept it at 10 o'clock and she never complained again. The third story is called Using This System. I'm a web designer. Every place I've been, I get put in charge of the fleet of websites, whatever company or group is running, and then I go through and do my thing. making sure the sites are tight, efficient and user-friendly as I can. Web design is like any task. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And for websites, that means the designer in charge has to be the arbiter of clutter. If things get to be too much on a page, or requests come in that would degrade the UI of the site, we had to reject them. We want sites to be fast, light and easy to use. Being the person in charge of the sites, I was generally the one to reject requests. We shouldn't do this because X, Y and Z reasons. I was told by my bosses that I couldn't say no, and that I had to be customer focused, even when the requests to update the site were coming from those without technical knowledge or the desire to understand what I was saying and the reason why I wouldn't do something. After a number of times of them getting a no because from me, they went over my head to my boss, and my boss said, just do it. And I had to come up with a solution. If they were going to go around my informal process based on my knowledge and experience, I would formalize it. At the organization I was working at, we had standards, which were signed off by the higher ups and had the word of law and guidance, which did get some sign-offs, but didn't go through the lengthy formalization process. Standards you had to follow, but everyone thought guidance worked the same way. That was the loophole. I wrote a 60-page web update guide, going over everything in the process, ensuring that any question I'd be asked, anything that needed to get done, any stupid question that had come my way over the previous 2 years, was answered. I then got my boss to sign off on it, and then sent it around, and also posted it on the internal use portal too. From that point forward, the guide was what we followed. The best part, and this is the malicious part, I never had to get any changes to the document approved. It was designed as a living document, and I was the sole person in charge of it. Every time a requester asked, hey, I want to do this on the page, I went and added the web update guide to specifically disallow what they were requesting. Oh, I'm sorry. As per the web update guide, we can't do this. This worked like a charm and made my job easier from that day forward. The next story is called Monitor Working Hours. This happened nearly 10 years ago. At the time, one's salary for this job was made up of a low basic salary, but a big uplift for the intensity of the job you were working. In terms of working hours outside of 9 AM to 5 PM, the way that employers made sure jobs had the correct uplift was through a process known as monitoring. In order for monitoring to be valid, a certain proportion of the employees on that job had to complete a diary of their working hours for 2 weeks. Of course, the diary was on an archaic electronic system, a pain to fill in, finicky, slow, and generally made an array to make it non-user friendly. In this particular location I was working in, there was one job which everyone dreaded working, because it was widely acknowledged that the workload was extremely high, i.e. frequently working 2, 3 or even 4 hours of unpaid overtime every day to get the work done. And this was not adequately reflected in the overall pay. This had been going on for the better part of a decade, and it was abundantly clear that the workload vastly outstripped the compensation. However, every time anyone complained, the employer would hold up their hands and say, the monitoring doesn't reflect that. Often because the threshold proportion of employees filling out the monitoring hadn't been reached. They went full, these are the rules, we are just following them. Essentially, the workers on that particular job were so overworked and the monitoring process so laborious that there were never enough people filling it in to reach the threshold. Cue Malicious Compliance. My best friend and I were suffering through this job for 4 months, alongside 3 others. Over the course of the year, 15 of us would work that job. It came to the monitoring period, and my best friend and I were meticulously about filling in the monitoring. We logged every single second we worked overtime, not missing a day for 2 weeks. Not just that, however, we lit a fire under everyone else. We texted, called, or otherwise persuaded all the others on this job to fill out their monitoring accurately too. In fact, we were so driven that all 30 employees filled out their monitoring correctly. Well, the monitoring period ended, and lo and behold, it demonstrated that we were being vastly underpaid for our roles, risking big penalties for the employer. Not only that, but it turns out they had fudged the payment rates for a number of other jobs too. The employer wasn't defeated yet, as they once again pointed to the rulebook, saying that any monitoring which showed a change in pay was due had to be repeated. So they set up a second fortnight of monitoring. You can guess what happened. Instead of being defeated by another round of monitoring, the cohort suddenly had the bit between their teeth. The second fortnight of monitoring, we did significantly less badgering of people, because suddenly everyone was rather motivated to do it themselves. The second round of monitoring came and went, with the same results as before. Significant underpayment. The employer continued to stall, but we pointed at the rulebook they had so often thrown in our face. They ended up having to pay people who were doing their underpaid jobs more to make them up to the correct level of income. Furthermore, the rulebook said that payments were retrospective for the whole year, so even those who had worked those jobs before the monitoring happened got back paid. Overall, I was owed and received nearly £10,000 in back pay. I reckon the employer shelled out the better part of 250k in owed pay, and all because we stuck to the system like they told us to. The last story is called More Sauce for You. I'm a server. I take great pride in my ability to efficiently run my section. The key is maximizing each trip to and from the kitchen, rather than getting table 31 a refill, then table 32 more salt, then dropping the check at 33. You check in at each table on your way to the back, grab everything in one go, and head out to the dining room, cutting down 3 trips to 1. As long as the customer trusts me to do my job, we are all going to have a great experience. That said, my biggest pet peeve is when a customer asks every employee that passes their field of vision for the same thing. For example, extra ranch. Why is it always extra ranch? I'm not talking about when you ask me for the ranch, then see me come from the back and it's clear I've forgotten it. I'm talking about when you ask me for more ranch, then 3 seconds later ask the food runner who just dropped off your fries for more ranch, then the manager who topped off your water for more ranch. Then, as the 3 of us are in the back, clamoring for the squeeze bottle, a 4th person turns up, telling us that table 32 wants more ranch. My malicious compliance in those moments is that I make sure every single person that was asked drops their own ramekin of ranch off at the table. Then I come up last with the final ramekin and the biggest grin. I completely ignore the fact that most of the table is now taken over with little dishes of ranch, rearranging some if need be, to make room for my final contribution. Because if you ask 4 people for ranch, you must want a lot of ranch. And isn't it great that you have it now? Thanks for watching the video to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the channel membership or Patreon. And now I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.